Chuck Missler puts it best. The Bible is an integrated message system from outside our time domain. Welcome to SkyWatch TV. I'm Derek Gilbert. Our guest is going to talk about some fascinating research being conducted by rabbis in Israel and what messages might hold in store for us. In studio with me are, my best friend, my wife, Sharon K. Gilbert, and the producer and director of a fascinating documentary film called Torah Code's End to Darkness, the man behind Pinlight Films, Richard Shaw. Richard, welcome.
Hey, thank you, Derek. Pleasure to be here with you guys.
This is fascinating stuff, and it is a somewhat controversial topic because of what it implies. So we'll get into all of this as to, how much information we can take from these codes. But I think for people not familiar with the concept of Bible codes or Torah codes, we need to explain, what are they?
Yeah, it's not some kind of hocus pocus or anything like that.
No, not at all. I mean, the more that I study this and the older I get, the more I realize how important numbers are in Scripture, just in general. I mean, there's so many dimensions given and years given, number of days and nights, all of these
numbers
things.
That repeat over and over again, too.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's like, what's up with all of that? And then you find out, you get into the kind of the simple codes, which we call gematria, which is every Hebrew character is assigned a number. And this has been going on for centuries. This is nothing new. And the rabbis would add up names and find out what the number might be. But now, what we're discovering is that there's something called the Torah Codes, which was perceived that it was in existence centuries ago, but we didn't have the technologies back then to really understand how to find it or what it was. And that wasn't discovered until the 1900s, when a rabbi by the name of Michael Dov Weissmandel, who was an incredibly brilliant mathematician, discovered ELS, or equidistant letter sequencing. Now, I know this gets really thick and heavy, but I'm going to go through the basics here so you realize this isn't mumbo-jumbo. This isn't like some kind of strange cult. These are numbers that are encoded in the first 5 books of the Old Testament. So what he discovered was that if you count, if you skip every so many letters, Hebrew characters, you get other words. And you think, well, you could do that with any book. Well, and that's true. But what happens in the Torah, unlike any other book that we've used, is you get repeatable results that are highly statistical as far as probability factor is way up there. For example, right after 9/11 occurred, Professor Eliyahu Rips, who is pretty much considered the discoverer of the Torah codes in the modern era, he would cringe if he heard me say that. But this is a name I want you to remember. Rips is a brilliant and humble professor of mathematics in the area of group theory, where he's doing things that are way beyond like the average person. This is a world-class mathematician. At the time that they discovered this, he was exposed to the concept of what Weissmandel came up with in 1976. And that number is 5736 in the Hebrew calendar. That number appears in tables all the time. It was the year that Rips discovered this thing that was expressed to him by another rabbi by the name of Yaniv. Rabbi Yaniv told him about this, that Weissmandel had discovered this. It wasn't until the 70s that we had a computer to even use. So you see how this is like, time-stamped. So the first computer that they ever did the Torah codes on was an Apple II, because that's all there was. And you can remember in those days, there wasn't enough memory to put the whole Torah in the computer, so they would do a few chapters at a time. And then in those days, there was no Hebrew font.
Right.
So then you have to think, well, how in the heck? And I asked him this at his apartment last time I saw him in Israel. How did you guys do this then? So long ago. And he said, well, we assigned every letter a number. Now, this is different than gematria. This is just so they could input it into the computer. So essentially what they got is they did testing to look for names and events and places and dates. they did it all numerically. I mean, so they would end up with a string of numbers or a table of numbers when they got done. Then they would have to convert those into Hebrew characters. And I said, oh, man, that's so hard. And he goes, oh, really? It's quite simple. He said, I'm going, well, maybe for you it is. I mean, I wouldn't know what I was looking at,
Yeah.
you know. But that's how they did it. But then later in the late 80s, Dr. Rotenberg, who's another really brilliant professor, also lives in Jerusalem, graduate from Moscow University, decided to make a graphic depiction of this. And what he came up with in the late 80s, early 90s is what we know now today as a Torah Code table, which looks kind of like a crossword puzzle with Hebrew characters running in different directions. That was his brainchild, and Professor Rips thought it was a lovely and beautiful thing. So that's how we got to that point. Rather than neglecting this, I have to mention that in those days, those early days, there were two other men working with Professor Rips. One was named Doran Woodstum, who was a brilliant computer programmer, and there was another man, Yoav Rosenberg. So it was the three of them together worked to develop this and came up with this. Well, what they discovered, I said, what did you find? What was the first code that you put in when I was asking Rips this, where you thought you weren't going crazy and that this was actually meaningful information? And he showed it to me. He said it was the Vilna Gaon.
Ah.
Oh, my goodness.
The
Now, for those-
genius of
Yes.
Vilna.
Yeah,
There's a
the
rabbi.
genius of Vilna.
Yeah.
So it comes up in the codes, the genius of Vilna, and then it like his birth and death, and it was in there, and where he lived, and all these things, it all appeared on one line. So he realized that the
goodness.
chances of that happening are like, thousands
Astronomical.
to 1.
Yeah.
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 So then he realized they were onto something that also meant, which gives you chills a bit, that the Torah was relating information thousands of years after it was written. Now, how is that possible?
Yeah.
So then there was this book that came out in the late 90s by a man named Michael Drosnin. Michael Drosnin wrote a book called The Bible Code. And on the cover of that book is a table. We call them tables that look like crossword puzzles. And it said, Yitzhak Rabin, assassin will assassinate. Now, he found that table a year before Rabin was indeed assassinated. Now, he didn't know what to do with it. He went and talked to the security guys in Israel and said, look, I have a table from a manuscript that's 3,000 years old. It says that Rabin's going to be assassinated. Well, at one point, he was afraid, from what interviews I've heard of him say, that he was afraid that they were going to think he was going to...
right.
Sure.
Yeah, he was the assassin. But come to find out, Rabin was indeed assassinated, and I don't remember the name of the assassin. It was like a short name, like a little four-letter word like a Nam or an Amin or something like that. Later, they looked in that same table, and the name of the assassin was also encoded.
Oh, my goodness.
But you wouldn't have known that.
No.
So this is the thing. It's like, well, does that mean that we can use the Torah codes as a predictive tool? And all of the rabbis say it is resounding no, because we don't know what this information is, and we don't know enough about the future to know what to ask, so we could be getting erroneous information. However, sometimes it indeed works, and sometimes we're getting information that might just be considered the zeitgeist of what's going on, that everybody's talking about, and it ends up in the Torah codes. I mean, we've seen that happen as well. So that's like a little bit, just barely scratching the surface of it. The film that I did gets into more of how all this works. And then the stuff we're going to talk about later today gets into the more current Torah code.
It is fascinating because it substantiates the belief of Jews and Christians, of course, that this is indeed a supernatural document that's been preserved for us.
Sure.
And you make a good point in addressing the concern that some have, the criticism that's been made by some, that this is essentially trying to foretell the future, which
Right.
is strictly forbidden in the Bible.
Right. In the book of
in fact,
Deuteronomy.
in
which
the
is-
Torah. Right.
Yeah. It basically says it's an abomination.
Right.
So, but it didn't talk about codes particularly.
And I guess what we need to point out is that the rabbis who are doing this research, as you say, are not looking at this as a way to try to predict the future. This is not,
No.
1-900 call, Miss Cleo or whatever to
No.
try to get a reading. This is trying to find what messages God may be choosing to reveal. Is that the right way to put it?
I think so. And the other thing is, like, what are we supposed to take back from this if we can't use it as a predictive tool? I think it just shows that everything about us is encoded. But yet once I had a conversation with Rabbi Glazerson privately in my studio, and I said, have you found pretty much everybody in the Torah? And he said, there's some people we can't find. And then I said, really? That was really intriguing to me. Like, why would they not be? And then I said, could the Torah Codes be the book of life?
That's a wonderful question.
Ooh. Well, we'll continue discussing the Torah Codes, how Richard Shaw got involved in this research in the first place, because this isn't exactly something you'd assume a filmmaker would tackle as a first project or top priority. But if we're dealing with a truly supernatural document, why couldn't God have encoded the book of life in the Torah? More when SkyWatch TV continues after this. Save nearly half off the cover price when you subscribe now to the brand new SkyWatch TV magazine. For a limited time from April 24th through June 24th, 60 days only, a 5-year subscription to